Hi everyone, welcome to Lions Academy. My name is Lion, and on this channel, I teach beginners and career transitions on how to transition and be an effective IT auditor. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that we people would not normally talk about when they are talking about testing controls in IT audit. I'd like you to know that when we are talking about control testing, we should be talking about like the four technology layers that IT auditors test. We don't just test the application layer, okay? So there are four layers that need to be tested: infrastructure, database, operating system, and the application layer. By the end of this video, you're going to have like a mental like a model of how your technology environment is structured and why every single of this layer is very important to you. Okay, so we have four different layers. Like I said, application layers. You'll be When you're looking at an application layer, that's the basic, like the different application, banking systems, HR platforms, ERPs. That is the application layer. And then we have the operating system layer. That's when you're talking about things like the Windows Server, the Linux, Unix. And then for database, you're talking about Oracle, SQL Server. For infrastructure, examples of infrastructures as the server network, cloud data centers, and all that. Every of this application is very important because a weakness at any of them of this layer can actually undermine the whole control testing you have done. Okay, if your application access control, for example, is perfect, however a database administrator has unrestricted access to edit queries and all that, then that control would definitely fail. Secondly, for SOX audits, ITGC testing under SOX 404 covers every of this layer. When you know this, it would help you understand the scope of your audit engagement when you are working. And then lastly, like for those of you that are just doing interviews, like when you go to your interview and a hiring manager is asking you about how you would audit a system, please make sure you talk about the four layers of application. So I'm going to go right into it and talk about the first one. So the first layer is the infrastructure, and this is actually the foundation that everything else sits on. When I say infrastructure, I actually mean like the physical and virtual servers and hardware, like the network devices, like routers, switches, like firewalls, the cloud environment, and all that. So now, as an IT auditor, what are we testing at this layer? Like we're testing like the firewall rules, network segmentation, just to be able to check whether the network is designed to limit access between the systems that should not be communicating directly with each other. This is where we are doing like tests. We test like patch management, like looking at the servers and networks. A real example I want you to hold on to from this layer is this: if you're testing, you request a list of like all administrative accounts on the network firewall, and then you would compare that list to the organization's documented list of individuals who have like for access control, who have like business need for that access. So any account that appears on the system, but it is not approved, like on the approved list, is going to be an exception. That is basically like infrastructure testing. Like it is also a testing that is evidence based and that you need to repeat. Now let's go to the database layer. This is where like the actual data lives. Okay, it's um it's the layer that I feel carries the highest risk for any financial reporting, and that is why it's also very significant. Like you pay attention to it in any SOX audit. So for the database, again, that is where the actual data lives, and I've given examples like Oracle, SQL. you know that is where data lives. So whatever system the organization uses to store its financial and operational data, the controls at this layer would determine whether that data can be accessed, whether the data can be changed or extracted outside of the normal application controls. Again, what do we test as IT auditors? We test who has direct access, like direct database access outside of the application. So aside having access to the application, there are DBA administrators that would have direct access to the database. Okay. In a well-controlled environment, most normal users should only interact with data through the application interface, not directly through the database. So if a business analyst or an accountant has directly like connection directly, maybe they have like a SQL connection that is directly connected to the production database, and it's a big risk and confirm. So we test whether the database administration accounts, when you're testing, maybe they are appropriately restricted, making sure like there's no like shared DBA accounts in use. You are testing whether the database audit login is enabled. Maybe anybody is reviewing it, so that if someone executes like any query or make any changes, like there's a log of it. And then again, we test whether changes to the database structure itself like goes through like the formal change management process. Giving a real example of this, if you say like if you want to talk about how you tested your database, you could say something like, oh, I would request a list of all users with direct database query access to the production database, and then compare it against the approved access to identify like anybody whose role does not justify the level of access they have. Now let's go to the third one, operating system. Most times we overlook this because again it's something that can be overlooked, right? It actually like sits between hardware and applications, and most times the control at this layer like they are also very important. So when I say operating system, I mean like Windows server environments, Linux, Unix, whatever operating system is running on the organization's production servers, or whatever operating system that hosts applications and the databases that we really really like, or the which are usually our main focus. So what are we looking at this layer? At this layer we are looking at like the operating system level access. We are looking at the types of servers accounts that are in use. We are looking at if there's a system login in place, and we are also kind of looking like if the operating system is patched. Okay, what do we test as auditors at this layer? We are testing, like I said, maybe like privileged access. We are looking at who has local administrator or root access on production servers. We are reviewing to make sure like that list is reviewed, making sure it's appropriate. um Again, like privileged access should be like tightly like, or operating system privilege access should be like restricted. Okay, so we are testing whether security patches are being applied consistently, and also maybe they are within the organization's defined patching window. Yeah, so that's what we test in the operating system. And then the last one is the application, which we are mostly familiar with. Most times that's what we focus on mostly. It's what you would think of first when you hear IT audits. Again, it is important, it goes beyond the application layer. Okay, but this is where the business processes live, like the different ERP systems, SAP, Oracle, like banking platforms, HR and payroll systems. Okay, they are kind of um the controls at this layer like is what governs how users would interact with business data and business processes. So what do we test here as IT auditors? We test user access, we test segregation of duties within the application. That means we are looking at like whether like segregation of duty, maybe making sure that a single user cannot perform a transaction from beginning to the end. Okay, so we're making sure like we are testing change management to make sure changes go through proper development, making sure there's approval and testing before being deployed. We kind of also test like the system generated reports, IPs, and all that. So we test whether access provisioning, termination. This is the one we are very familiar with within the application is functioning correctly. Okay. If you watch my previous videos, I think I've talked a lot about IT general controls on applications, so you will be able to understand. that. Okay. Now, bringing every one of these together, I want you to kind of, understand this with this framework in your head, right? Every layer needs control, and every control can fail at these different layers. Okay. So infrastructure is your foundation. That's the servers, the network. And I talked about what we test. We test firewall admin, access restriction, and whether the infrastructure itself is hardened and patched. And then database is where the data lives. Just go, this use this as your cheat sheet. Database is where the data lives, while operating system is what sits between the hardware and applications. Okay. And lastly, application is where the business processes actually happen. Okay. Here's an interview tip I would want to leave with you on this slide. The next time you go into an interview and an hiring manager asks you how you would audit a system end to end, walk them through these four layers. Start at the infrastructure, move to the database, come up with the operating system, and then complete it with the application. Explain what you look at for each of these layer. A lot of people who come in, like who attend IT audit interviews, can talk about application access controls from beginning to end. However, when you ask them to talk about the other layers, they barely can talk about it. Okay. So you should know and be familiar. You should be very familiar with these other layers, and quit talking about just the application. Okay. A lot of people don't know this, and that's why I thought to do this video, like the four technology layers that we are responsible to evaluate as IT auditors, making sure you understand it and why we are testing each of these layers. This is a very good foundational knowledge, and it would help you differentiate you from people that are just learning theory. If you want to continue building this kind of foundation, my IT Audit Fundamentals bundle covers all of this and more of the IT general controls in depth, talks about SOX, what it actually requires at each layer, the control testing methodology, how to document your work paper, like everything you need before your first IT audit through. The link is going to be in my description. Please make sure you like the video if it builds your understanding of how a technology environment is actually structured, or drop a comment telling me which of the layer like you like testing or you appreciate. I'll make sure I read each of your comments and I'll reply. I'll see you in my next video. My name is Layo. Learn with purpose, grow with confidence, and continue to lead.